In a shocking turn of events, a Chinese fighter jet is making an unprecedented move. It's trying to land on the deck of a US aircraft carrier. Chaos erupts as the crew races to respond, and the world watches with breathless anticipation. Considering escalating tensions between the US and China, such a dramatic maneuver seems conceivable. It could be a calculated provocation by China to gauge America's resolve. But if this high-stakes gamble succeeds, what might unfold? How will the United States counter such a daring affront? Join us as we analyze what would happen if an enemy landed on a US aircraft carrier. The thought of a Chinese jet fighter trying to land on a US aircraft carrier may sound like something out of a movie, but it's not totally impossible. There could be several reasons for such an attempt. It could even be a deliberate act to see how the US would react. If a Chinese jet fighter tried to land without permission, the US aircraft carrier crew would immediately jump into action. The air traffic controllers on the ship would try to contact the approaching plane, asking it to identify itself and explain its intentions. If the jet didn't respond or kept coming, the carrier's armed fighter jets would take off to intercept and escort it away. At the same time, the carrier's command center would start emergency procedures, alerting other US naval ships and shore-based command centers about the situation. The US would also try to talk to Chinese authorities to understand what was happening and avoid any misunderstandings that might escalate into a bigger conflict. The United States has a powerful fleet of aircraft carriers, each like a floating city with thousands of highly trained crew members ready to handle any threat from the air, sea, or land. In recent years, China has made great progress in developing its military aviation. They have various jet fighters, like the J-10. This is a versatile Chinese fighter jet that was developed by the Chengdu Aircraft Industry Group in the late 1990s. During the early 90s, the core of the Chinese Air Force was made up of first- and second-generation fighters. Although these aircraft were numerous, they couldn't keep up with the evolving demands of modern combat. This led to the start of a project to create a new, advanced jet fighter. At that time, China's aviation industry lacked the technology and expertise to produce a plane comparable to Russian MiG-29S or American F-16S. A crucial component of the J-10 is its engine. The original Lavi was intended to use a reliable turbofan engine, but China was unable to acquire it or secure a license to build it. Creating an engine from scratch was also too challenging and expensive. Consequently, China decided to use Russian AL-31F engines, which were also used in the Sukhoi Su-27 flanker. This engine became the heart of the new fighter. The jet features a tailless delta wing design with large delta wings mounted towards the rear and a pair of canards positioned higher and towards the front. Its airframe, constructed from a mix of metal alloys and composite materials, is designed to be both strong and lightweight. The Chengdu J-10 is a nimble, all-weather fighter aircraft that embodies modern technology and versatility. The aircraft can carry almost 7 tons of bombs and missiles. The first models were developed in 2003, and by 2017, more than 400 J-10 fighters in various versions had been supplied to the People's Liberation Army Air Force of China, or exported under the name F-10. As the newest fighter jet of the 4th generation, it is still being produced and updated. Known for its impressive features, the aircraft is quite effective in combat. Each jet costs about $30 million, making it significantly cheaper than its market rivals, which appeals to emerging countries. While it might not match the best Russian and Western 4th generation jets, the J-10 represents a major technological leap for China's aviation. Now, in the second decade of the 21st century, China's industry is poised to develop new 5th generation fighters, marking a new era in their aviation capabilities. And then there's the Shenyang J-11 fighter aircraft, commonly known as the J-11, which is a powerful Chinese jet that has been flying since the late 1990s. Built by the Shenyang Aircraft Corporation, this impressive aircraft is based on the Russian Su-27 design and is used by both the People's Liberation Army Air Force and the People's Liberation Army Naval Air Force. Renowned for its incredible speed, agility, and long range, the J-11 is a key player in China's air defense. It is designed to dominate the skies, armed with a variety of weapons including air-to-air and air-to-ground missiles, as well as bombs. The J-11 marks a significant leap in China's military modernization, showcasing its growing strength in the Asia-Pacific region. One of the J-11's most remarkable features is its exceptional maneuverability. This jet can perform impressive aerial feats thanks to its advanced aerodynamics and sophisticated fly-by-wire control system. It excels in high G-turns, barrel rolls, and other complex maneuvers, potentially giving it a slight advantage over other jets in its category due to its lighter weight and superior thrust-to-weight ratio. Another notable aspect of the J-11 is its formidable weaponry. It can carry up to 9,500 kilograms of armaments, making it one of the most heavily armed jets globally. Its arsenal includes advanced missiles like the PL-12, with a range of up to 100 kilometers, and the Russian R-77 missile, which reaches 80 kilometers. It also carries the PL-9 short-range infrared missile, the PL-8, the R-27 medium to long-range missile, the R-73 short-range missile, and the highly maneuverable PL-10, which can target enemies behind the jet. There are also plans to upgrade the J-11 with the PL-15 missile, boasting an impressive range of over 150 kilometers. The J-11 jet comes with cutting-edge technology, featuring top-notch avionics, an impressive radar system, and an advanced electronic warfare system. The radar can spot and track several targets at once, helping the jet with both air-to-air combat and ground attack missions. The electronic warfare system is like a high-tech defense shield, allowing the jet to find and block enemy radar signals. It can also release chaff and flares to confuse and dodge incoming missiles. Additionally, there are the more advanced J-16 and J-20 stealth fighters designed to compete with Western jets like the US F-15, F-16, and F-35. While Chinese fighters have shown impressive abilities, they still have their limitations. A Chinese jet fighter landing on a US aircraft carrier is an extraordinary scenario, but history provides us with similar events that offer valuable insights. Take the Black Sea bumping incident of February 12, 1988, for instance. On that day, the USS Yorktown, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, and the USS Karen, a Spruance-class destroyer, were on a mission in the Black Sea, conducting a passage exercise. The Karen was just 7.5 miles off the Soviet shore, while the Yorktown was 10.3 miles away. The commander of the Soviet Black Sea Fleet, Mikhail Chronopoulos, was ordered to halt the U.S. ship's progress. Initially, the destroyer Krasny Kavkaz was sent to confront them, but it had technical issues. Instead, the Krivak-class frigate Bezavetny took on the task. According to its captain, Vladimir Bogdashin, the Bezavetny was significantly outmatched. It had only 2 cruise missiles, was half the size of the Yorktown, and had just a third of its displacement. Meanwhile, the Soviet frigate SKR-6, led by Captain Anatoly Petrov, was even smaller, only a quarter the size of the USS Karen. The tension escalated when the SKR-6 approached the Karen, and just 3 minutes later, the Bezavetny closed in on Yorktown. Overhead, Soviet Tupolev Tu-16 bombers watched the drama unfold. As the American ships skirted Soviet waters, the Soviet vessels made contact. About 10.5 nautical miles from the coast, the SKR-6 bumped the Karen, scraping its paint but causing no injuries. The Bezavetny also nudged the Yorktown, but was quickly ordered to back off. Despite the bumps, both U.S. warships maintained their course. The Karen left Soviet waters at 11:50 a.m. without any further incidents. This incident highlights the critical importance of having clear and reliable communication channels between rival militaries, even during provocative actions. Another relevant incident is the 2001 Hanan Island standoff. On April 1, 2001, the EP-3 aircraft, part of Fleet Air Reconnaissance Squadron 1, embarked on mission PR-32 from Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan. Around 9:15 a.m. local time, nearing the end of its 6-hour mission, the EP-3 was cruising at 22,000 feet and 180 knots, heading 110 degrees, roughly 70 miles from the island. Suddenly, 2 Chinese J-8 fighters from Hainan's Lingshui airfield approached. One of these fighters, piloted by Lieutenant C. Dr. Wang Wei, made two dangerously close passes to the EP-3. On the third pass, disaster struck as the J-8 collided with the larger aircraft. The J-8 disintegrated, while the EP-3 suffered severe damage. Its radome was completely torn off, and the outer left propeller was heavily damaged. The collision resulted in a loss of airspeed and altitude data, depressurized the aircraft, and wrapped an antenna around the tailplane. The J-8's tail fin hit the EP-3's left aileron, causing the U.S. plane to roll uncontrollably to the left at an alarming rate. The impact sent the EP-3 into a sharp 30 degrees dive, almost flipping it upside down. It dropped 8,000 feet in just 30 seconds, then fell another 6,000 feet before the pilot, Lieutenant Shane Osborne, managed to stabilize the aircraft by leveling the wings and lifting the nose. In a later account, Osborne recalled instructing the crew to prepare to bail out as he struggled to control the descent using emergency power from the working engines. This allowed him to set a course for an emergency landing on Hanan. During the next 26 minutes, the crew executed an emergency protocol to destroy sensitive materials on board, including electronic equipment, documents, and data crucial for intelligence gathering. They poured freshly brewed coffee into disk drives and motherboards and used an axe from the plane's survival kit to destroy hard drives. Since the crew had not been formally trained for such destruction, they improvised, leading to a chaotic scene inside the plane, later described as looking like the aftermath of a frat party. Osborne had to make an emergency landing at Lingshui Airfield without permission after sending out at least 15 distress signals that were ignored. With the emergency code on the transponder, the plane touched down at a speed of 170 knots. It landed with no flaps, no trim, and a damaged left elevator, weighing a hefty 108,000 pounds. After the mid-air collision, the plane's nose cone was damaged, causing the NOAA 3 engine to fail, and the outer left propeller couldn't be feathered, creating extra drag on one side. Additionally, the airspeed indicator and altimeter were not working, so Osborne had to use a full right aileron to land. The Chinese interceptor that survived the collision had landed there just 10 minutes earlier. Wang, the pilot of the Chinese fighter jet, was seen ejecting from his plane after the crash. However, the Pentagon noted that the damage to the underside of Osborne's EP-3 could have crushed the cockpit of Wang's jet, making his survival unlikely. Sadly, Wang's body was never found, and he was presumed dead. For 15 intense minutes after landing, the EP-3 crew scrambled to destroy sensitive items and data on the aircraft, following strict protocol. As soldiers peered through windows, brandishing guns and shouting through bullhorns, the crew finally disembarked. Closely guarded, they were taken to a military barracks in Lingshui, where they endured 2 nights of relentless questioning before being moved to lodgings in Haikou, the provincial capital, and the island's largest city. Despite the constant interrogations, which left them sleep-deprived, they were generally treated well. Initially, they found the Chinese food unpalatable, especially the fish heads, but the meals eventually improved. To keep their spirits up and pass the time, Lutz Honeck and Vidnery created humorous routines inspired by TV shows like The People's Court, Saturday Night Live, and The Crocodile Hunter. These performances took place as they went to meals, the only time they were all together. 3 U.S. diplomats were dispatched to Hainan to meet the crew, evaluate their conditions, and negotiate their release. However, it wasn't until 3 days after the incident that the diplomats were allowed to see the crew, leading U.S. officials to criticize the delays caused by China. The 24 crew members, 21 men and 3 women, were detained for a total of 10 days. On April 11, 2001, the crew of the EP-3 was released and returned to their base at Whidbey Island. Their journey took them through Honolulu, Hawaii, where they spent 2 days in debriefings. Lieutenant Shane Osborne, the pilot, was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his heroism and extraordinary achievement during the flight. In China, the pilot of the J-8B Wang Wei was honored posthumously as a guardian of territorial airspace and waters, and his widow received a condolence letter from U.S. President George W. Bush. When the EP-3 crew arrived at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, they were greeted with salutes, including one from U.S. Air Force Senior Airman Curtis Town. U.S. Navy engineers estimated that repairing the EP-3 would take 12 months, but China refused to allow the aircraft to be flown off Hanan Island. Eventually, the disassembled aircraft was released on July 3, 2001, and transported back to the United States by the Russian airline pilot using two Antonov An-124 Ruslan planes. The plane was reassembled and made flight-worthy again at Lockheed Martin in Marietta, Georgia. It was then sent to L3 in Waco, Texas, for further maintenance and modernization, as L3 was the main provider of EP-3 services at the time. The aircraft returned to duty before 2013. China demanded $1 million in compensation for the lost J-8 and its pilot, but the U.S. refused to negotiate further. But the United States paid only $34,567 to China for the 11 days of food and lodging provided to the EP-3 crew. The incident happened just 10 weeks after George W. Bush took office, marking his first foreign policy crisis. The incident sparked strong negative feelings among the Chinese people towards the United States and boosted Chinese nationalism. Even though the aircraft destroyed in the collision had serial number 81194, footage of Lieutenant Commander Wang Wei flying a J-8B with serial number 81192 from a similar incident earlier that year became widely shared. Wang Wei quickly became a national hero and a symbol of pride for the Chinese military and the entire nation. After the collision, China briefly reduced its aggressive monitoring of U.S. reconnaissance flights. However, by 2011, U.S. surveillance flights near the Chinese coast had resumed their regular operations as if the incident never happened. Hanan Island is now home to the People's Liberation Army Navy's Hanan Submarine Base, an underground facility that can support nuclear ballistic missile submarines. In March 2009, Chinese ships and aircraft approached the USNS Impeccable, a U.S. Navy ocean surveillance ship, while it was operating 75 miles south of Hainan. The Pentagon described these actions as aggressive and harassment. In August 2014, the U.S. protested when a Chinese Shenyang J-11BH fighter jet flew within 30 feet of a patrolling Boeing P-8 Poseidon aircraft, performing aerobatic maneuvers, including a barrel roll. In May 2016, the U.S. protested again when two Chinese Shenyang J-11BH jets reportedly came within 50 feet of a U.S. EP-3 on a routine patrol about 50 miles east of Hanan Island. China responded by demanding an end to U.S. surveillance flights near its coast. Considering the already existing tension, if a Chinese fighter jet were to land without authorization on a U.S. aircraft carrier, the consequences would be significant, both diplomatically and militarily. Such an act would be viewed as a serious breach of international norms and a direct challenge to U.S. sovereignty. The diplomatic fallout would be severe, with the U.S. demanding an immediate explanation and apology from Beijing, leading to heightened tensions between the two nations. If a Chinese fighter jet tried to land on a U.S. aircraft carrier, it would create a major situation not just for the U.S. and China, but also for their friends in the Asia-Pacific region. Nations like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines have strong security partnerships with the U.S. They count on the U.S. military to help keep things peaceful and to stop any threats from other countries. Should a crisis arise, these allies might need to step up to help manage the situation and prevent it from escalating. This support could come in various forms, such as offering diplomatic assistance, sharing crucial information, or even contributing their own military resources. The level of support from these nations would be crucial in shaping the balance of power in the region and in deterring any further aggressive actions. At the same time, an event like this might force U.S. allies to make difficult choices or clearly define their stance. Countries with strong economic ties to China might be hesitant to act in ways that could be perceived as confrontational. This could lead to increased tension within regional alliances and strain relationships between the U.S. and its partners. When a Chinese fighter jet tries to land on a U.S. aircraft carrier, it brings up big questions about how international laws and rules help manage military actions and avoid conflicts. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, sets the rules for using the world's oceans. It tells countries what they can and can't do in international waters. According to UNCLOS, military ships and planes have the right to travel freely over international waters, but they must do so while respecting other countries' rights and safety. They are also banned from threatening or using force against another nation's territory or independence. If a Chinese jet tried to land on a U.S. carrier without permission, the U.S. would have a strong legal argument that China broke these rules. Landing a military aircraft on another country's ship without consent would clearly violate U.S. sovereignty and endanger the carrier's crew. Regional groups like the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and the East Asia Summit EAS offer platforms for countries to talk, build trust, and tackle security issues together. The U.S. and China can also hold discussions through channels like the U.S.-China Strategic and Economic Dialogue to address shared concerns and find ways to avoid misunderstandings and conflicts. One of the biggest worries about a Chinese jet landing on a U.S. aircraft carrier is the risk of escalating tensions and conflict. Even if the situation is handled smoothly at first, the incident could leave behind lasting mistrust and friction that might lead to future disputes. Right after the event, both the US and China would likely dive into intense diplomatic efforts, each trying to control the story and gain support for their side. The US would probably demand an apology and promises from China to prevent a repeat of such an incident. Meanwhile, China might downplay the event or argue that the US provoked it. If these diplomatic efforts don't solve the deeper issues, tensions could keep rising. The US might feel pressured to take stronger actions, like boosting its military presence or carrying out more assertive freedom of navigation missions. A mistake or overreaction from either side could quickly get out of hand, potentially involving other countries and making the entire region less stable. In the case of a Chinese fighter jet trying to land on a US carrier, intelligence and surveillance would play a crucial role. Both countries use various tools, such as satellites, drones, and reconnaissance planes, to keep track of each other's military activities and gather important information. Before the incident, US intelligence would likely work on understanding the Chinese military's intentions and capabilities. This might involve looking at activity patterns, intercepting communications, and tracking key assets like planes and ships. By building a detailed understanding of the Chinese military's stance and readiness, US leaders would be better prepared to handle potential provocations. Chinese intelligence would be keeping a close eye on US naval activities, especially when it comes to the deployment of aircraft carriers in critical areas like the South China Sea. They'd be keen on learning about the carrier's defensive systems, how its planes operate, and how prepared it is overall. This information could help them spot weaknesses and shape their own military strategies. Right after an incident, both sides would likely use their intelligence resources to gather more details and understand what happened. This might involve intercepting messages between the Chinese pilot and their base, studying radar and satellite images, and scanning social media and other public sources for any relevant information. How well the US aircraft carrier crew handles a Chinese fighter jet trying to land on their ship would depend heavily on their training and readiness. The crew goes through intensive training and frequent drills to prepare for various emergencies, including unauthorized landings and hostile actions. Operations on an aircraft carrier are complex and require smooth coordination between air traffic controllers, flight deck crews, and pilots. If an unauthorized landing attempt occurred, these teams would need to work closely to evaluate the situation, communicate with the intruding plane, and take the necessary defensive actions. Regular training exercises, both within the Navy and with allied forces, sharpen these skills and ensure personnel are ready to act swiftly and effectively in a crisis. These drills often mimic real-life situations, such as intercepting enemy aircraft or defending against missile attacks, giving crews a chance to practice their procedures and find ways to improve. As our world becomes more complex with multiple global power centers, the need for open communication and diplomacy is more crucial than ever. The US and China, being the two largest economies and military forces, have a unique responsibility to handle their differences carefully and work together on important issues like fighting climate change, improving global health, and ensuring regional stability. For naval operations, this means setting clear rules for interactions, sharing plans and information about activities, and creating ways to ease tensions if a crisis arises. Both nations need to be transparent, giving advance notice about major military exercises and deployments to prevent misunderstandings and avoid accidental clashes. Looking forward, the relationship between the US and China will likely involve both cooperation and competition. Despite having different interests and values, both countries have a shared interest in global peace and prosperity. By focusing on common concerns and building mutual trust, the US and China can work towards a more stable and secure future. As we consider these issues, it's important to remember the human side of the equation. The people serving on US aircraft carriers and piloting Chinese jets are not just symbols of conflict. They are individuals with their own dreams and worries. By understanding each other's viewpoints and striving for common goals, we can reduce the chances of misunderstanding and conflict while enhancing the benefits of cooperation. How can the US and China work together to prevent dangerous incidents from happening? And what steps should be taken to handle them if they do occur? Let us know your opinion in the comments below.